Shri N.S. Vaidyanathan ji, Lutsa, members in the dais, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure for me to be here with all of you and share our thoughts about how India and the NBFC sector can go about dealing with the larger issues of credit enhancement, credit growth, dealing with the NPAs, and how we can enable greater financial inclusion in the country. To set this discussion up, I'd like to first start by broadly describing the construct of the system we have as we have today. We have close to about 21 state-owned banks now after the merger of the SBI group. We have about 12 old generation private sector banks. We have 10 so-called new generation private sector banks. And of course, as you know, we have close to about 400 cooperative banks, district, state, central, all put together. Now, when you look at the kind of growth India is beginning to expect over the next many years, and estimates are that India could grow between 8 to 10% compounded over the next 10 years. And within the next 5 years alone, there is a report which has been presented here. I haven't seen the full report, but I saw the excerpt of it, which talks about the fact that the consumer economy and the consumption economy is expected to touch $4 trillion for 2025. When I saw this number, the first thing that struck me was that with the kind of capital we have in the country, with the number of players that there are in the country, are we here to finance a $4 trillion consumption economy? And if we are not going to finance a $4 trillion consumption economy in some way or the other, then definitely production is not going to happen. If production doesn't happen, then to that extent the growth expectation of 8-10% is going to get stalled somewhere along the line. So we certainly need a supply of financing to be able to finance such consumption in the country. Now, going back to the architecture, the concept of priority sector norms, a concept was first, initially drafted maybe in the wake of the nationalization and by the National Credit Council by Dr. K.S. Krishnamurthy Committee in 1972. And it emphasized that there should be a larger involvement of the commercial banks in the priority sector. No doubt, over the last 50 years, these organizations, these existing incumbent banks, or maybe about 40 or 50 of them, have been trying to do priority sector, and I do not deny, and no one can deny the amount of effort they have put in being able to finance goat and sheep and such inclusive banking at a village level, right up to inclusive banking at the social sector level. No doubt. But despite this work, and especially accelerated work over the last many years, why is it that we still say that financial inclusion, even after 50 years of introducing private sector banking, we still call it an issue? To share some numbers with you, in the Credit Bureau, we have 280 million borrowers. We have, in the Commercial Bureau, we have close to about 13 million entries. Now, if we see it's an issue, let's just step back and see what is the complexity of India, which is making it such an unsolvable problem for 50 years. And let us understand how to deal with that issue at the core. These are the numbers. When we think of India not as a policy that can be driven by any single large bank sitting out of Bombay and writing a policy for the country. Think of it like a Leh, Ladakh, Tirupur, maybe a Pathankot, maybe a Patiala, maybe a Tezpur. These are all the number of cities and towns. We have close to 20,000 of them. And imagine reaching the people in each one of these cities for inclusive banking. Then step back and think about this as a set of professions. In these very much town cities centers, people are salons, they're carpenters, they're chemists, they're tailors, they are casual labor people, they're people who have semi-employed jobs. They all need credit. Now you have the Rubik cube setting up where you have a two-dimensional issue of a complexity of professions and a complexity of geographies. Then add a third dimension into this, which is basically the kind of needs people have. And these needs come from the fact that people may have business needs, they may have wedding needs, they may have consumption needs, they may just have so many needs. And then you suddenly generally have a Rubik cube of a problem which is just unsolvable, because just how do you penetrate each cell of the Rubik cube and say, I want to give credit penetration to each part of it. And then in that context, certainly it dawns on me and the people who understand, who are probably watching this, that certainly 40 banks sitting in their headquarters writing credit policies for the country is not going to reach the issue of financial penetration across the country, no matter how hard we try. Let me give an example. The concept of policy, any organization that writes a policy to give a loan, and of course they need to have a policy. If you don't have a policy, they'll just have a huge NPA problem. The definition of policy, by definition, it's not inclusive. It is exclusive. It excludes people. That is policy. When someone says, I give a 20-year home loan, or someone says that, as per my policy, you should have an income tax return, you've straight away excluded all people who do not have an income tax return. Moment you say that the person should be living in the city for more than 5 years or 3 years before I give you a loan, you've excluded straight away people who have not been in the city for more than 3 years. The moment you say that that the person should be within the municipal cities of 20 kilometers of municipal limits of a city, you will find that anybody living out of 20 kilometers of the municipal limits is then therefore excluded. And these are normal policies. You pick up the credit policy of any bank, scrape it from the website and read it. It is there. And therefore you have to exclude anybody above 30 kilometers, 20 kilometers, I am excluded. Moment you say, suppose you give a property loan, the definition is, I need clear and marketable title deed. Of course, it's there everywhere. Now, what about a person who does not have clear and marketable title deed? You excluded the person. So, policies by definition are excluding people, not including people. And the amount of exclusion is close to 70 to 80% of the addressable market, and that's where the fundamental issue of being able to deal with this whole problem. Now, how do you deal with this issue of exclusion? We obviously can't go and tell an ICICI Bank or SBI or Capital First or a Munjal's Hero Group. We can't just say, no, we want you to financial inclusion, please lend to everybody. Of course, everybody will have a problem. That's not the way. We then have to see who is providing the financing, if at all we are providing it. Of course, certainly not mainstream banks and mainstream companies not providing. We claim, for example, that we do small ticket financing. You saw an advertisement, we finance a tailor-made to Fund Baba. But by no means I'm claiming even Capital First is giving financing to all these people. Of course, we have a segment, but I don't claim to have reached 20 million or people and so on and so forth. Nothing. And no bank can claim, no NBFC can claim. People happen to do it. People are doing it, but nobody's really reaching the segment. So, the one significant way, if not, is to actually say that how many institutions exist in the system? Can we bring additional capacity into the system of people whose core natural job is to do financing of such people? For example, I met someone who was financing goats in some place in Bihar. Obviously, I could figure out from his conversation that is not a work no bank can do. I found one entrepreneur who was giving financing to somebody to Kashmir, apple growers in Kashmir. He was giving 6-month financing or 3-month financing for production of apples. It is not part of any bank's policy. It's not going to happen. Question is, how do we encourage more and more such NBFCs who are naturally in that trade, who are grown and born and brought up in that particular city or location, to say, we want you and we want to encourage you to do more and more business, such that this policy-based exclusion that we have set up, how to make them viable and encourage them. Okay. Now when we say, how do you find those people and how do you encourage them? One of the biggest issues that will come up, which I assume that most people in this room will probably talk about, is your funding lines. I often meet many small NBFCs who are often wanting to borrow at 15%, 16%, doing a pretty good job, paying back, NPA of the system is zero, of their system, so ecosystem is so-called zero, but are often restricted by funding lines. Now, large NBFCs like the Hero Group and all that stuff will not have a problem. You keep going forever and ever and life will be pretty fine. But of course, the Hero Group and the Capital First does not represent the institution. There are just so many more of them. Now, an institution becomes permanent by nature if it can access retail deposits. Now, of course, RBI has a very legitimate issue with giving deposit licenses to non-banking finance companies because people know that there were issues 20 years ago and there were entities that went bust. There were sort of scams. We heard about the Sharda scam. We definitely empathize with the issue. We've got to then figure out how do we deal with this double issue of wanting to give deposit licenses to people who deservedly want to get there, but do not want, but at the same time distinguish them, separate the grain from the chaff. Now, one way to make this happen is to actually make them banks. And that, in that sense, RBI actually has done a terrific job, has done a great job of reforming the sector. And RBI came up with this norm of saying, create small finance banks. And we gave out 10 of them last 2 years or so. It is a landmark moment for the financial services system because 10 people who are NBFC who are struggling for money at some point of time suddenly have deposit licenses. Big move. But when you think of small finance banks have two significant restrictions. One, their requirement is for having 49% foreign ownership. Number two, they have a 75% private sector requirement. Nothing wrong with it, that's a natural business. That's why they were given the license in the first place. But then you have to, so that's what the small finance banks are. Then you might say, okay, small finance banks is one thing. If someone says, I don't want to be restricted by the limitation of 49%, then RBI is rightly saying that, look, you don't have to walk that path. I have put universal licenses on track. Come and take universal bank license if you really want that path. And great, because another reformist move, we have never seen this in the last 50 years of India. Someone came up and said, okay, now select universal bank licenses. Now, I was then sitting back and thinking, saying that what is it that stops you from applying for universal bank license? Why don't we apply? At that time, it appears that a universal bank, then, like a small finance bank for that matter, does a large number of activities which may not be your area of specialization. You've got to have branches, you've got to have tellers, you've got to have security, you've got to have a treasury system, you've got to hire the best people who can do bond, trading and all that complex things. Then you've got to do, you've got to do anyway banking, you've got to build a system that actually can wire money between India to, between maybe Bombay to Calcutta, real-time banking, customer put money in Calcutta and pick up the money in. All that goes as part of a standard universal bank. If someone says, I don't want to do all these things in my life, all I want to do is to raise money and lend money, but in a sustainable way where we can be assured of retail liability database for life. Then when we brainstorm this issue, then we do come with the concept of a no-frills bank. I know Shri Vaidyanathan from the time when he was regional director in Chennai, and I do say that he always told us that, look, be open, say what you have to say. We at RBI are always open to suggestions. So I'm taking the privilege, Mr. Vaidyanathan, to play back your own words to us, saying that be bold enough to ask what you have to ask. We will decide what we have to do, but feel free to say what you want to say. And I take the privilege of saying this. So therefore, this new concept, just like a small finance bank, we have we have the universal bank. We could create something called a no-frills bank, just like a no-frills account opened by the regulator a few years ago. In a no-frills bank, we will tell the customer that you don't expect too much from me. You cannot put money in Calcutta and expect it here. You can't ask me to wire money to Dubai and wire money to Chicago and all that. We are not in remittances. We just can't do all these things here. You can leave your money with me, I'll pay you 9% and banks are giving you 4.5%. I will lend the money at 13% or 12% or 11%. We will make a 3% margin, we'll be pretty happy. And this is my business model. So when you're pretty clear the customer is what you want to offer, then equally we can then develop a very simple bank. You can launch it tomorrow morning. I was talking to a small finance bank the other day, or an applicant of a small finance bank. I asked him, what are your challenges? He said, the problem is that I have to hire a treasury person. I said, how much does treasury person costs? I said, why do you need treasury? He said, no, as part of treasury management, I have to do bond trading. That guy's never heard the word bond trading in his life. Then I asked him, what does it cost? He says, it costs 1 crore rupees to find one treasury head. I said, 1 crore? He said, I can't afford 1 crore. Type in a kirana shop and say, please raise deposits for me. I am authorized to take deposits. Or you could also have your own 200 square feet branches. And you can say, please raise deposits from here. Please lend. Don't ask me for anything else. I'm only to. Now, you might say, okay, now coming back to the original question, how do you sift the grain from this chart and figure out whom to give this sort of a deposit license? There I think RBI can actually come up with a situation of having that, look, your credit rating should be, ABC, your capital adequacy should be higher than regular banks, I will do an annual inspection on you, you have to get yourself, subject yourself to a quarterly audit. You can really have a number of conditions around capital adequacy, against restrictions, about governance, which will make you feel good about those institutions. But those are easy to achieve. For any genuine clean organization which has to or wants to build a good long-term business, any good quality governance norms are actually good for the institutions themselves. So therefore, the long and short of the entire discussion is that if we can develop no-frills banking concept, where our core role is only to lend and is to borrow and lend, and nothing else, no complexity of a bank, then we can afford to start off those people with even low-cost resources. We don't need high-tech, brilliant people who are doing all these kind of complex transactions of a bank. And then we can have a low-cost people, we can have a lending, and we can have perennial operation, and life can go on, and that can make a view. Now, if we can create maybe 50 or 100 of them, we can even upgrade many of our existing NBFCs to that platform who want to stay non-complex banking, and you can actually invite professional, successful people to come and be part of the system. You could create maybe a 50 or 100 banks, and suddenly there will be some competition for the existing system. Lastly, I must point out that if you see the structure of interest rates in the country, almost all banks, despite deregulation, have a savings rate of anywhere between 4% to 3.5%. 70 banks having 4%, because there is no competition on the liability side. Moment we tell people, you come only as a small finance bank or this bank, then the big boys have absolutely no worry, because basically there's no one becoming a big bank to compete on that zone. So basically, if we have to get customers a better rate on the deposit side, again a large number of banks who can even play the big scale will actually definitely benefit. Now, I must leave this discussion with the notes about what happened just 2 points about what happened with this Prime Minister Niti Aayog discussion, because many of you in this forum have been on the side, have been talking about it. While there was a lot of discussion around a lot of factors, including capital markets and all that stuff, only contextual discussion from our NBFC point of view was that to say that how can we encourage more and more about the e-KYC processes, the e-signs processes, e-signature processes. Now, they've all been well established with the Reserve Bank of India, but I think a little more clarification will help on the front to make it happen. Then there was one more issue with regard to financial literacy. Our group, it's not my idea, but our group actually thought through a model called ASHA, which is called basically Arthik Shiksha Abhiyan, so that financial literacy can happen right from 5th standard and can be compulsory subject at the 10th standard and 12th standard level, so that people grow up knowing something about financial literacy, and a few other such concepts were discussed. But coming back to the key point of what we were discussing here is that how can we create a new category of banks? You might then ask us, what is this difference between this bank and a deposit-taking NBFC? There is a huge difference, because this is a part of the payment system, and once you encourage maybe 50 of these NBFCs to become a no-frills bank, then you can actually create a situation in perenniality, and then you can go back to the very crevices that we were left behind by the so-called existing banking system, and to top it up, they could actually give adequate banking services, not only for the segments that are being so-called excluded today, even in the included segment, you can make such financing available. I will give one example of areas which are part of policy and still not being lent. I'll give one example. If, for example, a lender says that I give education loans for if you get admission to a good college, which is a common rule. Of course, but that institution may not be present there. The institution may not have branches. The institution may not have competent people or interested people to provide this financing. So whether it is included as part of policy or excluded part of policy, there is a need for more players to come into the system, and that's what I would strongly advocate for. I thank you, Vaidyanathan, for allowing Mr. Vaidyanathan. I thank you for hearing this conversation very carefully, and really the encouragement that the Reserve Bank of India provides us to say, you say what you have to say, we will decide what we have to do. It gives us the courage to just request you for a completely new category of banks, which we believe can make a big change to India and cause inclusive banking, both on the asset side as well as the liability side. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.